Since the war began, we have been reading about and watching the devastation unfolding in Mariupol. Marko, can you tell us about the significance of Mariupol to Ukrainian history and its importance in this current war?
I believe that in this very dramatic time, after the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, Mariupol has become a very important symbol, and it is a symbol on a number of levels. It's a multifaceted symbol. And I would like to explain maybe a few aspects of that. And on the one hand side, it is a symbol not so much of Ukraine, but of a specific part of Ukraine, the southeastern part of Ukraine that includes the Donetsk Basin, meaning Donbass, and the coast of the Sea of Azov. And in the Russian propaganda throughout many, many decades, this region has been promoted as something that is not very Ukrainian, that is very heavily Russified, not only heavily Russified, but actually pro-Russian politically, and fundamentally that it is a part of Russia, of the Russian world, Ruski Mir. And this is absolutely not true, and the events of this war very clearly show it, but Mariupol as a symbol shows that too. First and foremost, the city has a very deep Ukrainian root. It started in the 16th century as a fortress of the Ukrainian Zaporozhian Cossacks. Then it was a center of the Ukrainian Cossack district in that area, functioned like that for over a century, almost 2 centuries. Only at the end in the last quarter of the 18th century, for a brief period of time, the Crimean Tatars conquered this and took over this fortress. But very soon afterwards, the Russian Imperial Army, with a very large contingent of Ukrainian Cossacks, basically annexed the entire southern Ukraine and the Crimea. The city of that place, which was at that time called in Ukrainian Domacha, was taken over by Zaporozhian Cossacks again. And they were very soon joined by a very large community of Greeks who were pushed out by the Russian imperial government from the Crimea and settled in Mariupol and in the vicinities of Mariupol very recently, until this tragedy that is happening to Mariupol now. This was the highest concentration of ethnic Greeks on Ukrainian territory. So it was primarily Greek and Ukrainian town. When it became an important seaport for the Donetsk Basin, and later it became also a very important industrial city with very high metallurgy. Many, many more people started to come in, many Ukrainians, very many Russians, also Jews and other nationalities. And just like the entire southeastern part of Ukraine, it became a very multi-ethnic. It was not Russian, it was multi-ethnic. It was Russian-speaking primarily, but it was certainly not Russian. It was this region that Vladimir Putin expected would be very receptive to the Russian army, that they will be basically meeting Russian soldiers with flowers. Not only have they not met Russian soldiers with flowers, but they have been staging a fierce, absolutely phenomenal, almost superhuman defense of this city. Actually, already in 2014, Mariupol showed where their sentiments are, because it was initially invaded by the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, the sort of pro-Russian proxy region. But very soon, it's the Ukrainian army and the residents fought back, and Mariupol remained in Ukraine. And not only is it now defending itself extremely heroically, but also we see that even those people who suffered tremendously under the barrage of artillery and aviation fire, when they have been taken by force by the Russian soldiers to Russia, or to this, in specifically to the city of Luhansk in the Luhansk People's Republic, they not only are not happy with that and they protested, but they actually give a lot of trouble to local authorities because they sing Ukrainian anthem and they fly Ukrainian flags. And these are children and women and older people who are doing this in face of total oppression, being basically under the total rule of the Russians. But Mariupol is also, in this war, a symbol of two other things. It has become a symbol of the Russian atrocities and war crimes in Ukraine to a large extent, before Bucha became another type of of symbol of this type, because the Russian army basically started attacking Mariupol from day one. On the 1st of March, they encircled the city entirely. And they have not even tried to pretend that they are targeting military or the military infrastructure. They were immediately started massive shelling and air raids on civilian targets. They have destroyed the city almost completely. I think that 80% of the buildings are totally destroyed. And probably the famous sort of scene was their attack on the Ukrainian drama theater in Mariupol, which served as a shelter for women and children, for over 1,300, I think, of them there. And there was two huge signs, children, right next to the building. And this did not deter the Russians. It made this a target for them. And the Russian army has shown that already in Syria, that if they know that there is a hospital or a place where children are, they attack these places. They don't actually try to in any way avoid them. They specifically target and attack them. And this is what they did with the Mariupol theater. So it is a very powerful sort of symbol of the Russian atrocities and their complete disregard for human rights, for human life, and for any sort of international law. And finally, Mariupol is a symbol of the fight in Ukraine, of simply tremendous resistance to the Russian invasion, not only by the Ukrainian army, but also by the regular people, by the territorial defense, and so on and so on. As I said, from the 1st of March, this city is totally encircled. Not only the food cannot be supplied to the city, but also the armaments for the soldiers. So they are fighting with everything they have there already for 5 weeks. What they are doing is almost superhuman as from the military point of view. And it would seem that why would they even resist? Because seemingly from the strategic point of view, this entire area is already controlled by the Russian forces. They could just give up. They, quote unquote, perhaps would be shown that they have no chance to withstand. And there is such a humongous humanitarian catastrophe in the city. But neither the city nor the army surrender. And what is the tremendous importance of this is that they have been concentrating on Mariupol phenomenal Russian forces that cannot move an inch almost very often. Many of them have been destroyed. If Mariupol were to fall, all of this Russian army would attack other areas of Ukraine. And this is what the symbol that I wanted to point out. Mariupol is not the only place like that. There were a number of key points that seemingly were not so important by themselves, but because they fought so valiantly, because they stopped the Russian forces on going on other targets, they actually saved Ukraine to a large extent. For example, the city of Chernihiv in the north, the city of Sumy, that almost didn't have an army battalion there, but by the force of the territorial defense, by the force of the partisans, stopped the massive Russian attack. And basically these two cities to a large extent saved Kyiv from the east. Kyiv would have been under huge pressure if these two places were to fall. So Mariupol, Sumy, Chernihiv, they are these sort of focal points of Ukrainian resistance, Ukrainian heroism, and by far not the only ones. Almost every place is like that. So Mariupol is really a powerful symbol of that. But apart from being a symbol, Mariupol is a real place with very, very real people who are suffering tremendously. There is still over 140,000 civilians trapped in that city. I would want so very much that this city can somehow be saved, still can be deblockaded and saved, and that for this very, very powerful international movement is necessary. Ukraine cannot do it by itself. And I hope that Mariupol will become also a symbol of a victory of the Western world and Ukraine in such a situation, and not a symbol of the failure of the Western world to save civilians in Ukraine.
Thank you, Marko. I share your sentiments and hope that Mariupol will be saved. Dr. Marko Robert Stech is a writer, literary scholar, and specialist in the history of culture. He is the director of CIUS Press and scholarly publications at the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. To learn more about Mariupol, we encourage you to read the latest entry in the Internet Encyclopedia of Ukraine. You can find the link in the text on our YouTube page.